a mother is preparing to bury her son. But as this heartbreaking day unfolds, three major developments have reshaped Nolan Wells' case. For the first time since the investigation began, the FBI has publicly explained its role. A former Mississippi judge has questioned whether local prosecutors will take meaningful action. And now, just 16 days after Nolan's body was recovered near Horn Island, his family gathers to say their final goodbye. Three major developments. One emotional day. Today, we're breaking down what happened and why it could shape the investigation moving forward. Before we continue, a brief warning. This case involves the death of a teenager and reported threats connected to the investigation. If you find today's subject difficult, please take whatever time you need. And if you're new here, consider subscribing as we continue covering every verified update. Let us know where you're watching from. Today's story begins in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, where Nolan grew up. Before becoming known through national headlines, he was simply a talented young athlete, a student, and a familiar face in his community with a bright future ahead. His funeral is being held at Centerpoint Church, with visitation from 9 to 11 a.m., followed by the service. Reverend Al Sharpton will deliver the eulogy as family, friends, and supporters gather to celebrate Nolan's life rather than the tragedy surrounding his death. The arrangements were handled by Lockett Williams Mortuary in Gulfport. Tyler Perry covered the funeral expenses, Colin Kaepernick helped fund the family's independent autopsy, and Byron Allen contributed to a memorial fund honoring Nolan. Updated reports also confirm that the service is open to the public and media, unlike earlier plans for a private funeral, allowing many more people to pay their respects. After the service, Nolan's family will hold a celebration of life at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. His mother, Christine Wansley, says she wants people to remember who Nolan was beyond the investigation and headlines: a son, a friend, and a young man whose life meant far more than this tragedy. Even as his family says goodbye, the investigation continues to evolve. In recent days, investigators, legal officials, and federal authorities have introduced developments that could shape where the case goes next. The question remains whether these updates bring the family any closer to the answers they've been seeking. The first major development came from the FBI, which had remained largely silent until now. The second involved Katie, the witness connected to one of the case's most debated questions, who has finally spoken publicly in her own words. But first, the FBI. Since the investigation began, one question kept surfacing. If this was a local death investigation, why was the FBI involved? For weeks, there was no clear answer. Only scattered reports and unverified claims offered pieces of the story, while the FBI made no public statement. That lack of clarity fueled speculation, with many wondering whether federal investigators knew more than had been revealed. As official answers remained limited, rumors continued to grow, driven more by uncertainty than by confirmed evidence. For Nolan's family, already living through unimaginable grief, the unanswered question about federal involvement became another burden. Was something bigger happening behind the scenes? Did the FBI know more than the public? As days passed without answers, those questions only grew, not because of new evidence, but because prolonged silence often fuels speculation. That changed this week. The FBI's Jackson Field office released its first detailed public statement explaining its role in the investigation. For the first time, federal officials clearly stated that the Jackson County Sheriff's Office remains the lead agency. The FBI emphasized that it is assisting local authorities with specialized resources and investigative support, not taking over the case. The timing of that statement stood out. Federal agencies rarely explain their role while an active investigation is ongoing. By doing so now, officials appeared to recognize how much uncertainty had developed around the case. More importantly, the statement finally answered the question many had been asking from the beginning. The FBI is not investigating how Nolan Wells died. Instead, its involvement centers on reported interstate threats directed at people connected to the case. Because those communications allegedly cross state lines, they fall under federal jurisdiction. This is no longer based on speculation. Jackson County Chancery Judge Ashley Cole publicly confirmed that she personally received threats related to the case. Although she was not involved in the events on Horn Island, someone close to her was present that day, and the reported threats became serious enough to draw federal attention. Rather than repeating those threats, the key fact is this: they were officially confirmed, considered serious, and are now the subject of a separate federal investigation. When threatening communications cross state lines, whether by phone, email, text, or online platforms, they can become an FBI matter, even while the underlying death investigation remains under local control. As of now, the picture is much clearer. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office continues leading the investigation into Nolan's death. The FBI's role is limited to identifying those responsible for the reported threats connected to the case. This clarification came alongside several other developments. Only days earlier, Nolan's parents met with District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath and Civil Rights Attorney Ben Crump. Afterward, Crump confirmed that investigators' findings will be presented to a grand jury once the investigation is complete. He also announced that Nolan's cell phone will be examined by both law enforcement and the family's independent investigative team. Sheriff John Ledbetter has also pledged a complete and thorough investigation, promising to follow the evidence wherever it leads. Even with those assurances, however, questions remain about whether prosecutors will ultimately take action based on the evidence. Taken together, these developments show an investigation moving on several fronts at once. The sheriff's office continues the primary investigation. The district attorney prepares for a future grand jury review. Nolan's family pursues its own independent investigation. 2 autopsies remain pending. And the FBI has now clarified its limited but important role. Each part serves a different purpose, and progress in one should not be mistaken for progress in another. Understanding those separate roles is one reason this investigation has been so difficult to follow. Then another silence finally came to an end. Her name is Katie. Despite the online speculation, Katie was never an unknown figure in this case. Her connection became public almost immediately after Nolan disappeared. Early on, her mother, Gracie McCormick, confirmed on Facebook that Katie had spent time with Nolan on Horn Island and had already contacted Nolan's family. Katie was never hidden from public view. What remained missing for nearly 2 weeks was her own first-hand account. Imagine her position. A young woman suddenly found herself linked to one of the country's most closely followed investigations. Online theories spread rapidly, and people who had never spoken to Katie or Nolan debated what she supposedly knew. Yet throughout it all, Katie stayed largely silent. Instead, her story reached the public through others. A family friend first shared a second-hand version, and later her mother addressed rumors online, mainly to correct misinformation rather than introduce new facts. For nearly 2 weeks, every version of Katie's account passed through someone else's interpretation before reaching the public. That changed this week. According to Christine Wansley, she and Katie finally met face-to-face. For the first time, the 2 people whose conversation mattered most spoke directly, without relatives, social media, or second-hand retellings standing between them. That meeting quickly became one of the investigation's biggest developments. Christine later said that Katie's first-hand account differed from what she had previously been told. Katie has consistently maintained the same basic timeline. She and Nolan spent time together on Horn Island before eventually going separate ways. Katie returned to a boat with her own friends after Nolan told her he planned to reconnect with his group and return to the mainland. But one crucial detail has often been misunderstood. Katie never claimed she actually saw Nolan board that boat. Her understanding came only from what Nolan told her before they separated, not from personally witnessing what happened afterward. That distinction is critical. There is a major difference between hearing someone's plan and seeing that plan carried out, and that difference leaves one of the investigation's biggest unanswered questions unresolved. Between Nolan telling Katie his plans and the moment she rejoined her own friends, the timeline becomes uncertain. What happened after that remains unknown. Katie cannot explain those missing moments because she was no longer with Nolan. His friends have shared their own account, while investigators continue reviewing witness statements, phone data, digital evidence, and other records to reconstruct what happened. For weeks, many people treated the issue as 2 competing stories. Either Nolan stayed on the island or intended to leave. Katie's own explanation is far more limited. She is not claiming first-hand knowledge of what happened after they separated, nor is she directly contradicting Nolan's friends. She is only describing the conversation she personally had with Nolan before they went separate ways. That precision matters, not because it solves the case, but because Nolan's mother was finally able to hear directly from the last known person outside his friend group who spoke with him, without relying on rumors or second-hand accounts. Even after that meeting, however, the central mystery remains unchanged. No one has fully explained what happened after Nolan and Katie went their separate ways. That gap in the timeline remains incomplete, and investigators continue working to determine what occurred next. For nearly 2 weeks, much of the public discussion treated the case as if there were only 2 versions of events. One suggested Nolan remained on the island. The other believed he intended to leave. Katie's own words, however, present a more careful picture. She has never claimed to watch Nolan carry out his plan or to know what happened after they separated. Instead, she has limited her account to one thing she personally witnessed: the conversation she had with Nolan before they went their separate ways. Everything afterward falls outside what she says she knows. That distinction is exactly why her meeting with Christine Wansley matters. Not because it solved the investigation or revealed a dramatic breakthrough, but because, for the first time, Nolan's mother heard directly from the last known person outside his friend group who spoke with him, without relying on second-hand accounts, social media, or weeks of speculation. Even so, the central question remains unchanged. What happened after Nolan and Katie went their separate ways? For 2 weeks, uncertainty shaped nearly every conversation about this case. Nolan's mother struggled to reconcile different accounts of her son's final hours. One version spread online. Another came from Nolan's friends. Neither fully explained what happened. Then the meeting finally took place. Katie and Christine Wansley sat down face to face. No intermediaries. No social media summaries. No second-hand interpretations. Just Katie sharing, in her own words, what she remembered, even though parts of her account differed from what Christine had previously heard. The meeting was not a confession, nor did it solve the case. It did not explain what happened after Katie last saw Nolan or how he ultimately ended up in the waters near Horn Island. That missing stretch of time remains unresolved and is still under investigation. What the meeting did provide was something Nolan's family had been missing from the start: a first-hand account. While it did not answer every question, it offered greater clarity than weeks of rumors and speculation. Even today, certainty remains out of reach. As Nolan's family lays their 18-year-old son to rest, they are still waiting for critical answers. 2 autopsies remain pending. A grand jury has yet to review the evidence. Investigators have not publicly established the full sequence of events on Horn Island. At the same time, reported threats connected to the case have expanded the tragedy far beyond Nolan's death. In just a few weeks, the investigation has affected nearly everyone involved. The FBI publicly clarified its role. Katie unexpectedly became one of the most closely watched witnesses in the country. Reported threats prompted a separate federal investigation. And Nolan's parents have continued grieving under extraordinary public attention while waiting for the answers they believe their son deserves. Inside the church today, however, the focus shifts. A mother stands before family, friends, and a community that knew Nolan long before the headlines. She speaks not about investigations or unanswered questions, but about her son's life, his memories, and the person those closest to him will never forget. That is not closure. It is a family choosing to honor Nolan while living with questions that remain unanswered. Outside the church, the investigation continues. Across the country, people are still waiting alongside Nolan's family for the day when those unanswered gaps are finally replaced with verified facts. When that day comes, we'll continue following every confirmed development. Subscribe to stay informed as this investigation moves forward.